Pluralsight. This module is reading publishers from a JSON configuration file. The goals for this particular module are to create a JSON configuration file that contains a list of all of the publishers. We're then going to read that JSON file in and build that list of publishers. So instead of hard coding them all like we did previously, we're now going to read which ones we want to put into that array from a configuration file. Let's get started.
Yeah, you have to go to the settings, mobile settings, and check the app is there, app settings is there now. In that app, go to Zomato delivery app. And then
So far, we've built everything on the right-hand side. We've built our different publishers, the console logging, the local storage logging, and the web API logging. We did build our log publishers service, which has the array of publishers that we're going to publish to, but we're going to modify this slightly now so that it reads from a JSON configuration file. Inside of that file, we're going to have a logger name, the location, and whether or not it's active. We're going to build a log publisher config class that matches the structure in the JSON configuration file, and that's what will be then read in the log publisher service class. In our demo then, when we're configuring the logging, we first create the JSON file with the list of all the publishers, and we add an isActive flag to each publisher. That way you can turn these things off and on based on which ones you want to publish to. We're going to add a class to match the properties in the JSON file so we can read it in easier, and we're going to build the publishers array now from the list of active publishers in the configuration file. Let's go ahead and configure our logging using the JSON file. Our first step is to build our JSON file. Locate the assets folder underneath source, or if you don't have one, go ahead and add one now. Right mouse click and choose new file. Let's give it a name of logpublishers.json. And then inside of here is where we can create our array of objects. So each one is going to have a logger name, and then you can set whatever name you want. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of map them to the same names that I created, console, local storage, web API. Now each one, it does have a logger location. Now for console, there's nothing. We're not going to use a location. And then as I mentioned, we want to add the isActive flag as well. And I'm going to go ahead and make that one true. Then we can just copy this for each of the providers that we've created, right? So each one of those log publisher classes, we just add another one. Local storage, so if you add any additional ones, you just add them now here. And the last one we'll do will be the web API. And this is where we need to get that http:/localhost, right? And then the port number, and then /API/log. So if we go back over here to the log publishers, and we go all the way back down here, we should be able to find that particular number. And we'll replace that right there. And I'm going to leave them all true for now as active, so that we can go ahead and make sure they all work, and then we can turn them off and on selectively. Now that we've designed all of these, let's create a class that has the exact same property names. Open up logpublishers.ts, and let's export a class called logpublisherconfig. So this is where we can then add logger name of the type string, logger location of the type string, and isActive, which is a Boolean. So we now have a class that matches the structure of our JSON file. We now need to modify our log publisher service class so that it reads from that JSON file. We're going to need some more import statements here. So the first one we'll do is observable, and that comes from rxjs/observable. And then we're going to need some of those other ones we had as well, rxjs/operator/map. Remember, we had used these before. We also had the operator catch, and we had the observable throw. So add those import statements in the log publisher. Once we have those, we're also going to need to bring in this log publisher config. So log publisher config, because that's also coming from that log publishers. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and add a constant now called publishers_file, and I'm going to set that equal to assets/log-publishers.json. This is that file name that we're going to read from. Since we're going to be reading the file using HTTP, down here in our log publisher service, let's add on a handle errors method. Now luckily we've already written this one time, so we can go ahead and grab this. If we go back over to log publishers, locate our web API, you'll see the handle errors right here. Go ahead and copy that. Go back over here, and you can add that now in here, because it's the same type of code. At some point you may wish to create another service that handles your errors for you. Let's now add another method inside of our log publisher service class called getLoggers. This is going to return an observable of log publisher config classes, so it's an array of those. And all we're going to do is return this .http.get, passing in our publisher's file constant. We're then going to map the response that comes back and make sure it responds back as JSON. And of course catch any errors and pass any errors to the this.handle errors. So we now have our handle errors, we have our get loggers. Now all we have to do is modify the build publishers here to start using that new array that we're going to read in from our JSON configuration file. Wipe everything out in the build publishers method. Let's create a new variable called logpub that's of the type log publisher. Now remember, that is the base class for all of our log publishing classes. We're going to call the getLoggers method that we just created. Remember, that returns a JSON, so we can subscribe to that and we can get the response. And what we're going to do then is we're going to send that response into a function block here. So let's close all of that off. And now with inside of here, we're going to do something with this response. What we're going to do is we're going to do a for loop and say let pub of our response, but we want to filter that response by looking for the isActive. Remember, that's what we put into our configuration file there to specify whether or not we're using that particular publisher. So we're simply going to return the complete list, but we're then going to filter it. So what do we do inside of this block? Well, inside of the for here, let's actually do a switch and look at the pub.logger name. And just to make sure, let's go ahead and do a 2 lowercase here on this. And inside of this switch is then we can do each case. So if you remember, we have council. We also have, take a look back here, local storage and web API. So we want to do a case for each one of these, local storage and a case of web API. Break. So we've got our case statement set up. So what do we do inside of each one of these then? Well, this is where we say, okay, let's assign to that log pub a new log council. Because we know that if it's council, we want to use our log council. And there's nothing else we need to do here because there's no location or anything. Now, let's set the log pub here equal to a new log local storage. And finally, we can do the log pub equals to a new log web API. Now, in this one, though, we need to pass in HTTP. Remember, the constructor for that says, hey, we need an instance of the HTTP service. Now that we have all of that, just below our switch statement, let's go ahead and set the location, if any, of the logging. So we do log pub dot location is equal to pub dot logger location. Remember, that's the logger location that's coming out of the JSON file. We can also add the publisher then to the array. So this dot publishers dot push that log pub onto the array. So if you remember, we've got our publishers array here. What we need to do then is loop through and get a list of all of those publishers from the JSON file, but filter them down, and then for each one, simply create a new instance of this log pub. Remember, each one of these, log council, log local storage, and log web API, all inherit from log publisher, so that's valid. We then set the location, if there's any, that comes in from the JSON file, and then we push them onto the array. Let's test this out by setting a breakpoint right here on the for loop. We'll go over to our debugging window and let's go ahead and launch Chrome. Now again, you might have to refresh the first time that you do that, and there we go. Now it paused over there in Visual Studio. So we're here. So how many did we get? Well, let's go through here. Yep, look at that. We got some. So we got our council, right? That's the first publisher that came in. Excellent. Okay, there's no location to send from the logger location, but that's fine. And then we push that onto the array. We go back to the next case, and this time it's the local storage. And this time there should be a logger location, and that's the key name in local storage that we want to use. That then gets pushed onto the array. And our last one then is the log web API. So we got them all. Great. Let's go ahead and just hit F5 and let it run. And now we should be able to click on the test log, and if we do everything correctly, I already had the breakpoint still set in the web API, we can see we stopped there. So this is great. Let's go ahead and hit F5, let it continue. Let's go ahead and stop this. We're going to leave the breakpoint here, but now let's go back over to Visual Studio Code. Let's open up our log publisher, and let's set the web API is active property to false. We should be able to come back over and just rerun this, go into localhost 4200, of course, and let's test the log. And as you can see, it did not stop at the web API, so that means that our isActive flag is working. In this module, we added the ability to configure publishers. Now we did that by creating a JSON file and then reading that JSON file in and building the publishers based on those JSON entries. And remember, we added the isActive flag so that you can turn the publishers off and on. Well, congratulations, you made it through this course. Inside of this course, we created a logging system for Angular. We added different levels of logging, so we could log debug messages, informational messages, warning messages, etc. We learned to log these different messages to the council, to local storage, and to send them to a web API. We also learned to make this configurable by setting up a JSON file. I truly hope you enjoyed this course. For Pluralsight, this is Paul Sheriff.